very much for being here today. We have a very special session for us today. We're welcoming a very special guest, which is the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the human rights to safe and drinking water and sanitation. This is a real fantastic opportunity for us to welcome a very prestigious and important person who is making a big difference in the area of water at the global and international level. Before I do the proper introduction that he deserves, please let me give you a little bit of the context of why are we having this special session. And for that, we need to put this in the context of Water at Leeds. I think most of you know already what Water at Leeds is, but we have a few external people as well. And also I want to contextualize the relevance that this event has for us in this context. So, as many of you know by now, Water at Leeds is one of the interdisciplinary research hubs or centers that we have here at the University of Leeds, but it's also the oldest, I believe, and one of the largest. It was established in 2009 by Professor Julia Martin-Ortega, who is here and is one of his current directors still. And the idea behind Water at Leeds was really to ally all the forces that were within the university, all the people who are doing excellent research on water already at the university, to come together and create this network of people who, by being together, actually has much more power in terms of trying to address the grand global water challenges that we face in the planet, from the very, very local level to the global level. And we cover a range of multiple disciplines, and this is one of the most beautiful things of Water at Leeds, which is from the engineering to the economics to the politics to the humanities, the arts, communication, really all the range of disciplines are included in Water at Leeds. So there's 4 missions. Water at Leeds is organized around 4 missions. The first one is really what is at the heart of any research institution, any university, is actually undertake the fundamental and applied research that actually enables us to have the information and the knowledge that we need to address the global water challenge, so putting us at the center of the research and innovation community. So this is like our first mission, which is at the heart of the very nature of what we do every day, which is we're researching about water. However, to be able to do that, we cannot do that alone. We need to do that in partnership. So the second mission for Water at Leeds is to indeed develop those partnerships with the agents of change, again, from the global to the local level, so we can maximize the value of the research that we do. Right? And we cannot do that alone. We do it with the people on the ground that are working in addressing these global challenges. And this relates directly to our third mission, which is why bother? Why we even do all this fundamental and applied research? Why do we work in partnership with our partners? Is because we want to make an impact. We want to change the life of people. That we want to change and make the planet a better place. We want to address this water challenge, reduce inequalities, and essentially try to make the world a little bit better or a little bit less bad these days as we can for humankind and for nature in the planet. But of course we're doing that now, but that needs to keep going. So that's why we have a fourth mission, which is the next generation. So train the water experts of the future in being able to have this interdisciplinary knowledge and skills to indeed be able to address those challenges. I want to, in this moment, I realize I haven't introduced myself actually. So I have the privilege to be one of the associate director of Water at Leeds, the one that leads with the second one, the partnership and the value of water research. So my name is Julia Martin-Ortega, and I'm Professor of Ecological Economics here at the University of Leeds. I already mentioned Joe, who is one of the directors of Water at Leeds. I also have one of our colleagues, Paul Hutchins here. So Paul is Associate Director for the third mission, which is the one on impact to society. But also nothing would happen in Water at Leeds if it was not with the power and the force of my amazing colleagues, Gabriela Lopez, which is the head of Water at Leeds, Susanna Hobson, which is the Research and Innovation Manager, and Marie Boyle, the administrator, is at the door, and you have seen her. So really the possibility of having Pedro here today, and I'll introduce Pedro in a minute, is really only possible because it's this amazing engine that runs Water at Leeds. So I definitely want to acknowledge that. These 4 missions, we undertake them everywhere in the world. You see this map, I think that covers pretty much all the, I don't have anything in Australia, but actually we think we do have. It's like the map is not up to date. We are everywhere. I believe we have, this number keeps changing, to be honest. This is the last one I heard from you, Joe, last week about for members within the university that form this community. Again, this number also keeps changing, but we have 25 million pounds of value of active research. This is the research that is going on at the moment, not cumulative, not, you know, this is, at this given moment, there is people working, very, very busy, working on these things for this amount of research money that supports our research. And we have 51 active projects. Again, that is in this very minute, things that are going on right now. And I could portray so many pieces of work that we do. There's so much to show you in terms of showcasing what we are doing everywhere in the world at all these scales and levels. But I've chosen, because of the topic of today, I've chosen to just make reference to the fact that we're really trying to provide evidence at research evidence at the highest policy level as well. We work at the very local level as well, but today I want to highlight this sort of big picture global level. There is a lot of our colleagues here that do research that affect many of the sustainable development goals. There will be multiple examples from that. We've also been, for example, recently with some colleagues, Joshua Cohen and Gabriel Lopez, who are here in the audience as well. We have been to the United Nations, and this photo, which is very poor quality, but I still put it because it's literally a screenshot, like it was us sitting at the United Nations taking a photo of the PowerPoint presentation that was going at the time in the high-level meeting for harmony with nature and living well. So we're really trying to influence the processes at that level. And as part of those efforts, this is where we're coming for today. I was very privileged to have the opportunity to be consulted by Pedro Arrojo on the elaboration of this, his latest special report on the water and economic nexus, how to manage water from a human rights perspective. So that having the opportunity to contribute to that work and to present some of the work that we were doing at Water and Leeds with colleagues. I have my colleagues Klaus Gelenk and Christopher Sulch, which contribute to the work that influenced this report. It was a fantastic opportunity and example for us to be able to interact with the Special Rapporteur. So I'm not going to delay anymore, and I want to formally introduce Pedro. Pedro was appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to Safe Drinking Water and Sanitation by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations in September 2020, and he started his mandate in November 2020. Before that, I mean, his trajectory of impact is impressive, but he was also from 2016 to 2019, he was actually a member of the Spanish Parliament, so elected member of the Spanish Parliament. He has been professor of fundamental analysis, economic analysis at the University of Zaragoza in Spain from 1989 to 2011. Since that moment, he has been emeritus professor. And during these 3 decades, he has been publishing an incredible amount of a body of work, which is publishing hundreds of scientific papers and books. But I would say, for me, I want to end this. There's so much we could say about Pedro, but one of the things I do want to say is that, and this makes it very personal for me to have this privilege, because when I was starting my PhD in the early 2000s in Spain, there was being a revolution, I can say that, a real paradigmatic change in how people were viewing the management of water. Traditionally, water has been seen as an asset to manage for its supply, which is trying to get more water into the system to make sure that people have safe drinking water, but also to irrigate. It was infrastructure, it was dams. And there was a group of people who were led by Pedro who said, we need to change our water culture, we need to realize actually it's also about demand of water. How do we manage the amount of water that we take from the environment, the amount of water that we require from the environment? And that led to a movement which in Spanish was called the Nueva Cultura del Agua, New Water Culture. And it looks like a nice sentence, New Water Culture, but it was true. It was really trying to make a change in the culture in our understanding of our relationship with nature. And I think, this country, in the UK, we're having a moment of crisis, and I hear more and more voices in which we need probably a change in the water culture that we have. So we definitely have a lot to learn from Pedro. And I just want to say, Pedro, how grateful and how honored I am that you're here with us today. And please join me in welcoming Pedro for giving us...
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. To all of you, in particular, Julia. It's a great honor. It's a great honor for me. And a clarification. My name is Pedro Arrojo-Agudo. As you probably know, in Spain, women keep their last name when they marry. So, and sons and daughters receive two surnames. Their fathers, for the first, and their mothers. My father's last name was Arrojo, okay? And my mother's was Agudo. Normally I would be in Spanish, Mr. Arrojo. No Mr. Agudo, Mr. Arrojo, the first one. But I prefer to use both surnames to always remember also my mother, okay? So Pedro Arrojo-Agudo. And perhaps I will briefly explain what UN Special Rapporteur is, okay? Very quickly. Rapporteurs are, as mandate holders, are independent experts on specific topics selected by the Human Rights Council, the UN's Human Rights Council in Geneva, okay? The topics are usually linked to specific human rights. In my case, linked to the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, but there are other mandates on conflict-affected territories, such as, unfortunately at present, Palestine, for instance, or on topics like toxic pollution, more general, okay? My role is to monitor compliance with and reports of non-compliance, of course, with the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, and to advise governments and the UN system. Each year, I must present and debate two thematic reports to the plenary session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and another one to the UN General Assembly in New York. So last year, I presented a report on water and economy nexus, managing water for productive users from a human rights perspective. So, and I will try to explain in half an hour the fundamentals of what I defend in that report. Well, when I was teaching at my faculty, economics faculty in Zaragoza, at the beginning of the course, I used to encourage my students to reflect on the value of the things most important to them. And I reminded them of a phrase, sentence, said by the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. He said, "Every fool confuses value and price." And I asked them what the difference was between these two terms, economics and chrematistics. And we were in an economic faculty. So after thinking about it, they ended up saying, well, that there was no difference, that they were the same concept. And then I explained to them that 2,300 years ago, Aristotle clearly distinguished both terms. For him, chrematistics refers to the management of money and goods valued on the market, while economics refers to the management of household goods. Different. After discussing these topics, every year we came to the conclusion that the most valuable things cannot be bought or sold. Like true love. In Spain, we have a song, you know, a very famous song that says, "El cariño verdadero ni se compra ni se vende." So true love cannot be bought or sold. So in this way, okay? By referring in any case to water management, I do not intend, of course, to dismiss the productive use of water and its monetary value, but rather to place these monetary values in the context of the multiple values that at stake, in the case of water, in the management of water and aquatic ecosystems. Values that we often cannot even compare or measure in monetary units. How can we compare, for instance, the value of the water needed to produce avocados legitimately, produce avocados for export, with the value of the water we need at home to guarantee a decent life for our families? Or what value in euros, in pounds, would we assign to the drinking water we need daily to ensure the health of our family? Water has multiple functions, multiple uses and values. However, I usually employ this comparison. If we compare them with those derived from the use of timber, for example, that is also a natural renewable resource, okay? We will see that important differences emerge. Both, of course, require preserving the sustainability of aquatic and forest ecosystems. This is the same. Forest cannot be managed, I used to say, as a timber store, okay? And rivers cannot be managed as H2O channels, but as in both cases, living ecosystems guaranteeing their sustainability for the good of all. Okay? However, substantive differences arise once timber and water are properly obtained in a sustainable way. In the case of timber, I think it seems for everybody reasonable that the company that harvested the timber sell the logs to the sawmill of its choice, no problem. The sawmill will sell the timber boards and beams to construction companies or furniture factories that will sell their products to society at appropriate prices, no problem. In other words, once the sustainability of the forest is guaranteed, insofar as the values and utilities of wood are interchangeable in a coherent way with capital goods, it is reasonable and consistent to manage them according to the market logic. However, applying the same approach to water would lead us to serious errors from my point of view, because many of the functions, the main ones I would say, function and values related to water use cannot be consistently converted into monetary terms. This is the key issue. In my report, I insist on the need for an ethical reflection that allows us to discern priorities in the various uses and functions of water. And in this regard, I propose always the following categories. In the first level, I used to talk about water for life, in uses and functions that sustain life in general, and in particular the life, cohesion, and coexistence of human communities. That vital minimum necessary for a dignified life, just as a human right to drinking water, first. Second, the water, even that rural communities need to produce their own food, which is their human right to food, in fact. And even the water that a river needs to guarantee its health, and as an expression of the human right to healthy and sustainable environment that is already recognized by the UN. These values and functions must be managed with the highest priority. That doesn't make sense to talk about scarcity of water for human rights. If you think on 100 liters even per person per day as a minimum amount of water. Well, this is less than 5% of the water we are extracting from nature. No rivers will be dry for extracting only 5% of the water we are extracting. So if we have a priority, that doesn't make sense to talk about scarcity for human rights. Second level of priority, water for the common good in uses, services and functions that society democratically considers to be of general interest. And this should be managed as a second priority. As a third priority, water for economic development. All right. In productive activities that allows us to live better. It's okay, it's legitimate, beyond the satisfaction, of course, of basic needs. These uses of almost importance, of course, must be managed, but at a third level of priority, not as a third level, a third level. And finally, I used to talk also in a kind of provocative way, I confess, no. I used to talk about water as a crime. In productive activities that poison entire populations with toxins. These activities, because they are illegitimate, must be prohibited and avoided at all costs, no matter how profitable they may be for those who promote them. From my point of view, the market is not the right tool to manage these ethical priorities, human rights, or ecosystem health. There is a Spanish proverb, and we were talking, we need to look for something equivalent in English. We should not ask for pears from an elm tree. No hay que pedirle peras a un olmo. This is the expression. I don't intend to demonize the market. I'm not against market. I'm against using the market to manage values that the market neither knows how to manage and nor needs to know how to manage. It's not a marketable question. From my perspective, we need to develop multi-criteria participatory decision-making processes. Given that, the management of water and aquatic ecosystem is vital for all of us, without exception. There is a pressing need to promote democratic water governance, providing the population with relevant and understandable information about the values at stake in coherent units or ways of expression, So these values will undoubtedly include economic values consistently expressed in monetary units, of course, along with other linked to health or to an environmental or social nature, or even ethical and equity values that must be considered in making the appropriate decision in each case. Following this line of argument, I believe that the fresh water available in a community or territory should be considered as a common good, accessible to all but not appropriable by anyone. Sharing rights, but also sharing responsibilities and obligations. I also believe that aquatic ecosystems, rivers, aquifers, lakes, and wetlands, should be considered common natural heritage that must be managed, ensuring their sustainability, developing an ecosystem-based approach at basin level from an intergenerational perspective. In this case, it is once again essential to ensure the participation of all those who depend on the watershed and its ecosystems, both in the enjoyment of rights and in the assumption of responsibilities and obligations. Participation is essential when we talk about common goods. I even believe that the climate system, and the water cycle as part of it, should be conceptually considered as a humankind natural heritage. Okay, to be recovered and managed under the shared responsibility of the whole humanity, applying the principle of equity, both in the distribution of responsibilities and contributions based on each individual's means. The problem arises that when we realize that we lack a comprehensive structure for the human community that allows for effective democratic management, as we are seeing, in fact, when addressing ongoing climate change, unfortunately. Developing democratic water management from this perspective requires articulating what Eleanor Armstrong calls a nested management of commons, from the local level to the basin level and even at the global level. A nested management that represents a huge democratic challenge, which must include objectives such as promoting sustainable management in large basins, as well as equitable management and allocation of rights and duties in extremely complex societies. That is why I defend the need for states to assume the responsibility of establishing the public domain of aquatic ecosystems, of available waters, and water and sanitation services. But without forgetting that this is about managing common goods and assets on which human rights depend, and therefore states must guarantee transparent, accountable management open to the effective public participation. In short, democratic water governance that must adopt a human right-based approach. This is my point of view. When the United Nations insists on the need to promote a human rights-based approach to water management, it is not simply referring to guaranteeing the minimum vital amount of water we need for a dignified life. Of course, this is also, but it is referring to an integrated approach to water management that includes irrigation, industrial, urban, and environmental uses and functions, based on the coherence and priority to comply with the human rights at stake. It is important to think on integrated approach. When we talk about, as an example, a comparative example, when we talk about a water management approach based on the principle of sustainability, we are not simply referring to the minimum ecological flow, to be respected in rivers. We are not talking about what ecologists are asking for. No, of course, this is also, but rather how to develop integrated and sustainable water management in nature, agriculture, industry, or drinking water supply. A human rights-based approach requires placing human rights at the center of water governance, including the sustainability of freshwater ecosystems as part of the human right to a healthy and sustainable environment. It means prioritizing the life-supporting functions of water in the legal and regulatory framework, in public policies, and financing strategies, overcoming the de facto prioritization of water for productive activities. That is, in fact, what happens. Furthermore, managing water as a common good requires prioritizing the common interest over individual interests. With regard to the allocation of flows for users that produce individual benefits in a legitimate way, it is essential to apply criteria of equity. It's a problem. It's a democratic problem, not easy at all. And to establish corresponding duties of responsible use by the beneficiaries, as well as accountability to society of the institutions that manage water services. Focusing on drinking water and sanitation services, there is a long-standing, even ancestral could be said, tradition of local management. Water is deeply rooted in the territories, Under this perspective, it is reasonable that town councils and community authorities should assume responsibility for managing water and sanitation services locally, leaving no one behind. However, it does not ultimately exempt states' responsibility and obligation to guarantee human rights. The principle of subsidiarity must be applied, ensuring that the government and supramunicipal institutions support local authorities. To this end, public-public non-profit partnership strategies must be developed and are being developed, in fact, as well as public-community partnership strategies, such as the one promoted by the law that the Colombian parliament is about to approve, I hope in a short time, at the proposal of the Red de Acueductos Comunitarios, the community aqueduct network, which manages water and sanitation for 11 million people in rural areas. Traditionally, the management of public domains of a water and aquatic ecosystem has been structured through concession or permit systems under the responsibility of powerful public institutions. There is extensive experience in public water management that we would take advantage of. However, it is urgent. On the one hand, to correct the serious biases induced by private interest with influence over public institutions that have distorted the principle of the general interest. And on the other hand, it is also urgent to identify the new challenges and objectives that govern the general interest of today's society, such as addressing, for instance, the climate change. It is important to move from traditional supply-side strategies where the state had to meet along the 20th century mainly, even now also, to meet growing demand by building new infrastructure, large infrastructure with significant public subsidies, regardless of costs and impacts, to developing sustainable demand management, not sustainable, that promote, in sense, regardless of cost and impacts, and in this sense, without take care of sustainability, of rationality in economic sense. No? Under this perspective, there is a need to move from traditional technocratic management models to new participative approaches in line with, we know, the Aarhus Convention or the Escazú Agreement in Latin America or the Protocol on Water and Health in the pan-European milieu, related to access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters, in particular in water issues, with legal frameworks that are in force at present, such as the Water Framework Directive in the European Union. It's a good framework directive. Finally, in the report, I focus my attention on the challenge of promoting efficient and responsible use of available water, thinking about the productive uses of water, but not only. The market is often presented as the sole driver of productivity, economic rationality, responsible water use, and efficiency. Let me briefly reflect just a comment on the term efficiency. Okay? The efficiency that allows us to do more with less, of course, is undoubtedly a goal worth pursuing and encouraging. But we must keep in mind that efficiency does not guarantee sustainability and does not guarantee human rights. I give you an example. In Almeria, the southeastern Spain is the driest region in Europe, equivalent to the African Sahel. Well, there is an extraordinary coastal aquifer, El Acuífero de Dalias, on which the most efficient irrigation system in the world has been developed. It is known as the Garden of Europe. You eat tomatoes from the driest part of Europe, and many things like this, you know? The aquifer would allow for the development of some 15,000 hectares on the plastic, no, greenhouse crops. Okay, it's huge. But it's a so good deal, so good and so many benefits. The problem is that today there are almost 50,000 hectares, not 15, but 50,000 hectares. So we are efficiently killing the aquifer. We can kill the planet efficiently. And of course, in Almeria, the efficiency is not guaranteeing the human rights of the thousands of African immigrants who work in greenhouses at 50 degrees. If we don't recognize the limits of nature, and we have this priority, the principle of priority for sustainability, for human rights, efficiency is nice, but is not enough. However, there is a wide range, in any case, a wide range of public economic tools and management strategies that promote economic rationality and responsibility in the productive uses of water without responding to market logic, instead aligning themselves with the consideration of water as a common good and with sustainable management of based on human rights. I dedicated the end of the report to this question, so you can consult it. Many principles and mechanisms, and for instance, tariff systems, identifying and establishing effective sustainability constraints. The principle of cost recovery, combined with equitable public subsidies, why not? The principle of non-deterioration, complemented with the principle of who deteriorates restores. Competition through transparency and citizen participation, benchmarking. Adaptation strategies based on hydrological, territorial and urban planning instead of managing water rights in the face of uncertainties arising from climate change in future markets under speculative logic that governs them, as you know happened with the rights in California. Okay? I don't have time to elaborate on these principles, measures and strategies, but let me explain for reference what I stand for example, in terms of tariffs. Okay? Just as an example, and you can consult the report. The management of water and sanitation services, I advocate promoting non-profit tariff system based on consumption blocks and increasing rates. The first block should offer an affordable rate for what is considered the minimum necessary for a dignified life as an expression of the human right to drinking water and sanitation. And even for families and people living in poverty, this section should even be free. The second block should be adjusted more or less to cost recovery. However, luxury or excessive uses should have a much higher price, which generate a cross-subsidy of these uses toward what are considered basic needs. When comparing, it is interesting to think on this. If you compare this approach with market logic, it is clear that the market lowers prices for good customers to encourage consumption and maximize profits. It's okay. It's good. However, I'm proposing a tariff system that is the opposite to this. Well, the question is, the key is that the objective in my case is not to generate profit, but to guarantee a good universal access service, ensuring its economic viability, minimizing the ecological footprint. In the report, finally, I also make a room to highlight the risks and impacts generated by privatization strategies, commodification, and financialization. And I compile the main points of my predecessor, Professor Leo Heller's last report to the General Assembly, and my first report also to the General Assembly in 2021, I think it was, But in order not to be too long, I leave prefer leaving time for the debate. I prefer to focus on this explanation and hopefully pedagogical of what I understand democratic water governance should be from a human right-based approach. And thus now, open to the debate and your intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pedro. So yeah, very important, very, very valuable content. And I know for a fact that this resonates with a lot of the people in this room, but we want to hear from you. We want to have the opportunity to ask questions to Pedro, but also to maybe debate some of the propositions that Pedro has done. Anna.
Thank you so much for a really interesting session. And this issue of water tariffs, I think, really gets to the heart of what we're talking about. So just having come back from South Africa and having talked for a long time about the South African water tariffs, because you've got the free basic allocation in South Africa. So in some ways, South Africa has been trying to do the system that you're talking about in terms of the tariffs. And for a long time, I've been teaching that as a very progressive system and something that, lots of countries should be looking at. But more recently, we've started to hear criticism coming from South Africa that actually this tariff is having a regressive effect for the very poorest. That actually the incentives in the system have meant that municipalities have tended to do the very barest minimum, and actually wealthier consumers are buying themselves out of the whole system. So the economics of the whole system are sort of shaking in terms of the whole municipality. So I just sort of want to hear you reflect a bit more on these tariff systems and what might be some of the unintended consequences.
Well, I have to know better the experience of South Africa. I think it's very interesting to know it. And I don't, much better than me. So for sure, probably the criteria is this one, and we have we need in this case as in many others to reflect under the practical experience and probably to reform in an adequate way. But I have no the experience, so. The main issue is that the criteria must be to combine the need to make viable, economically viable, the service with the universal access, and in this sense to build kind of cross subsidiation. At the same time, it is perfectly, for me, legitimate to develop subsidies from a specific social or another question. Very often we talk in Europe, water pays water. And they said, well, what are we paying now? For instance, in Europe now we will have the new directive with very strong requirements on the new emerging pollutants, such as pharmaceutical. We need double price for sanitation. And I wonder, but who has to pay this? Citizens? Or who polluted pays? Obviously, we have this principle, polluter pays, but it is not in place properly. And like this, many others, with nitrates and many other things. So, okay, let us review this, because at the end, we need to have also fair tariffs that must be possible to pay to the people who live in most vulnerable and in poverty situation. No? So, well, and another question that is important, when we talk, we need, for instance, now, we need huge investments for facing, for instance, climate change, for facing the challenge of sanitation. And we say, no, but full cost recovery, huh? And we ask the most impoverished people to pay for it. We say, well, Europe, UK, Spain, France has made the big infrastructure on the financial subsidies from the state. All the countries, the United States, all the countries. And now we are requiring to the third world, to the southern, the most impoverished people to afford for it? No. In a moment, the public funds is justified, to be invested for questions that the municipalities cannot afford for it. And it's not question to give the municipalities, to the hands of financial institutions that finally take as a business a question, the financialization of. We need to reinforce municipalities, and in this sense, investments that overflow the capacities, the local capacities, is legitimate to give this support. Well, it's a complex issue.
No, but I think it's a great example, I think, of why we really do need to have this dialogue between the university and this instruction, because we are the people who are gathering that evidence, and Anna, your evidence is so incredibly valuable. So we need, for me, this just reinforces the idea we have the responsibility of keep feeding this evidence that we find, and indeed contribute and maybe reform whatever it needs to be reformed from this proposition. So it's a great example of that. Thank you for that, Anna. One thing yes, when you get the microphone, can you please introduce yourself so Pedro, but also the rest of the people in the audience know where you're coming from and who you are? Alban.
Hello, Pedro. Thank you very much for the talk. I'm coming from Opus Independence in Sheffield, and we're looking at decentralised commons-based stewardship, so modelling the future rights of nature in the UK. So I have a critique, a provocation, and a query, if you don't mind.
A critique on?
Yeah. So I have
provocation or a provocation here?
And an inquiry. Well, one, the critique in the sense that it continues to be anthropocentric, with it being a human right for the access to water. So in your free, clear plan of access to water being 5% of the extraction rate at this moment in time, could there be a possibility actually where you calculate the needs of more than humans within that for a mutually assured flourishing within nature? The inquiry, so that's a provocation, would be at what scale do you see the requirement for that governance? Do you see that at a bi-regional level? Do you see that at a state level or a regional, European level, for example? Or do you feel that the participatory democracy is required at all scales?
I think, from my point of view, it's a general approach. But I agree with the approach of Ostrom, when she talked about this. She said, combined. No, it's not the name. Governance. No, how do you? No, integrated is not that. Sorry? No. No. No, it is in a different level, from the local level, basin level. It's multi-level, but there is another word. It doesn't matter. So in this sense, we need this kind of approach. From my point of view, we are talking about human rights. We are talking about common goods. Non-profit cooperation between different levels, from the local level, not just municipalities. In many places we have the problem of that this management is in the hands of community-based management authorities, until, of course, national level and even international level, when we address, for instance, transboundary basins or challenges that are overwhelming the capacities of the states. So for me, we need to combine these different levels for having at the end the capacity from the basic level of local level to the more general challenges, including, if it was possible in a moment, the question of the water cycle. We have the discussion now with, in the last 2023 conference, water conference in New York, this Dutch team, the Economic Commission on Economics of Water, something like this, financed by the Dutch government, that launched the idea that, let us recognize the cycle, the water cycle, as a global common good, but nothing at all about ecosystems, nothing at all about local management of the available water at local level, nothing at all about this question. So for me, it is not fair, because at global level, let us take this concept of global common good. But we have no institutionality and the capacity of organizing in an effective way the participation of the community involved, that is the human community. So in this sense it's okay, but as you know, in the cloud, it doesn't. But when we have at river basin, yes, we have the capacity to involve all the municipalities, the different actors and so on in a participative way to manage this heritage, common heritage, natural common heritage. And at local level, municipalities, communities, we can do these kind of things. I used to refer the experience of a big city such as Lyon, for example. Lyon is very interesting to know how they are managing the water under participative approach, very transparent and very interesting, equity, integrating the most vulnerable people around the city. For me, it's a good example, not the only one, but in a big city. It's a big city, several million people, no?
And then just the provocation that Alban was mentioning, we talked about this last night, this debate between the managing water from a human rights perspective and the rights of nature, the rights, and you know, this, whether this is in conflict or in alignment. Yeah. I would advocate that in alignment, but
no, I have approached this question in one of the reports, I think 2 years ago. It was the report on making peace with nature for progressing in the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. And in a moment I said, well, when we take this approach, ecocentric approach coming from the cosmovision, indigenous ancestral cosmovision, is, from my point of view, I agree, is very solid, it's very coherent. Anthropocentric approach is in principle in the opposite side. But from the moment we are talking about the paradigm of sustainability, from the moment when we recognize the human right to a safe, to a sustainable nature, ecosystems, well, is from a different approach we're converging with the other paradigm, no? And for me, there is an advantage to take into account this convergence, because when we are in this society and we said, well, okay, the river, I don't know what, has a legal personality, a personhood, okay? The first question is to say, well, and who is responsible for it? Who is the representatives? When you are in an indigenous community, it's very clear. We are us, the ones who are with the river every day. But we are in a modern society. Who are related with the Thames rivers or with the Ebro River? Well, millions of people around, irrigators, the state, the municipalities, all the ones who will say, me too. And what do we do with this? So I think in this sense, it's good to have perhaps this connection and to say, well, when we have prepared something like the legal framework of the directive, in which we have concrete objective, and we say we have to respect and recover the good ecological states of the ecosystems. Very good. This is a concrete issue. And all the people around are responsible for it, and we have to organize the participatory approach. This is good. We go in the same way, of course. But then we have to develop, implement in a practical way. But I think it's interesting to have this convergence, conceptual convergence of both approach from different points of view at the beginning.
I would agree with you. Yeah, Jan.
Hi. Thanks very much. Thanks for the lecture. My question follows from the previous one, and in particular from your answer. In relation to the global commons. Sorry, I should have said who I am. I'm Jan Selby from Politics in Leeds. In particular, your answer relating to the global commons. So I guess I want to push you on what your approach to treating water as a common good, what that what that means or what it might mean at a global level. Because obviously, as you well know, we live in a global system which is deeply unequal in lots of ways, and in which, for instance, Europe as a whole and Britain probably more than most are effectively importing water from much of the rest of the world in terms of agricultural and other commodities which have been produced in the global south and then imported. We have big environmental overdrafts in relation to the rest of the world, while on the other hand there are countries in the global south, many of them quite water poor, which are depleting their water resources for production of commodities for export. So, I mean, thinking around a problem like that, and other problems of a sort of global nature, what do you think it might mean, or what it should mean, to treat water as a common good at a global level? And I know the institutions don't exist, and you said that, and I accept that. I mean, one way of asking you would be to say, if you were in charge and could it create such an institution, what might it do to address global commons good problems like that?
I don't agree with this approach. I don't agree when some people talk about water as a global common good. I don't agree. Water, I say water at local level, the available water in a territory, the available water in a community is a common good in this territory, in this community, where they can have participatory approach for dealing with the water with rights and duties and organization for this. This is for me at the local level. At basin level, the same. The ecosystem, respect with the people that depend on this ecosystem. This is a natural common heritage under the responsibility of the people and institutions that are related, that depend on this ecosystem. And at global level, I can accept that the climate system is a global heritage, common natural heritage at global level. So is the whole humanity who can deal with this challenge of climate change, for instance, okay, with equity. We respect who are the main responsibilities and the capacities and so on. The problem is we can have, for the moment at least, institutionality and capacity for dealing with this participative approach, democratic approach. So talking about general human rights common good is very dangerous when indigenous people, for instance, listen this kind of profile. They say, no. This is not, we don't need someone from Brussels to come in our country to deal with our water. We are managing in our river, in our territory. No, it is not global. It's our task, our challenge at territorial level, at local level. And I agree with this kind of approach, not from an egoist point of view, but as a pragmatic and a possible way to develop a human rights-based approach with real participation, involvement of the people, responsibilities and rights at the same time.
I think we have the lady here, yes?
Thank you very much. My name is Pedro Arrojo-Agudo. I'm from Bradford, but also affiliated with Polis. My question is around the indicators for the human rights, water and sanitation. So, I mean, since 2010, we've sort of moved from not being sure that there was a right to, I think, everyone likely agreeing that the rights exist. But even so, when we say something is affordable, so I pick up on the conversations today around economics and affordability, what does that really mean in human rights terms? And do you think it is worth us having very clear indicators that are not just 3%, because we've seen that somewhere, but are really tied to human rights? What's your view on that? Thank you.
I think that indicators are necessary, but I don't rely too much on this perspective. I respect, and it's okay, you know. But, well, what means to access to water and sanitation? It is clear in the principles, and we can have the projection very clearly. For instance, something that is a contrast, a negative contrast. The figures that we are employing for having the reference of how many people have known the human rights for guarantee, and they say, well, 2 billion people. It is an estimation of the WHO in, I think it was 218. But recently, from Zurich, one of very, very good and prestigious team on water issues, their assessment is that it will be the double, 4 billion people. And when I have not a profound, deep analysis of what they did, but my experience in the visits, the official visits to countries, say to me that probably they are right. Why? Because when you go to Peru, when you go to Tunisia, when you go to many countries I have visited and I have analyzed in a very precise way, what is the figure, the official figure that we employ? Well, the official figure that the water comes in the networks are potable water, drinking water, but it is not true. Most of water that comes from the networks are not good disinfected, or not at all. There is no chlorinate. In many cases, many, and more, the networks are not well maintained, and so you have 50% of leakage, 60% of leakage. When we have this kind of networks, what happens? As they say, the Mexicans, por turno. What do you say in English? By shift, no? Yeah, so yeah, intermittent provision of water. So what happens? Imagine what happens around in the network around a point of leakage. What you can imagine you have around, and probably you have close to here you have the sewage and so. So when the moment every day you take out the pressure, there are intrusions, contaminant intrusions. So a network in these conditions cannot provide drinking water. It's evident. And you have plenty of networks like this one, but they are assessed are potable water because it's under pressure and so on. And many more and more cases in which in origin the water has heavy metals, for instance, or toxic pollution from agriculture, intensive agriculture. And it is not possible to take it away. So this is not potable water and is chlorinated. And it seems to be good water, but is polluted and is not safe drinking water. So from my point of view, in this sense, you have the reference of, a reference with a figure. But finally, when you analyze much more precisely, I think that the team from Zurich has right. Is half of the population at present in the world perhaps has no guaranteed access to safe drinking water.
So again, I think another example in which the evidence and the knowledge that we can provide from as a research community is that we need to improve those indicators, we need to improve those mechanisms of assessing these things. I think I have Paul, and then Klaus, and then, sorry, I forgot the name.
Thanks so much for this, and appreciate you keeping going. So yeah, I'm Paul Hutchins. I'm an associate professor here at Leeds and part of the Water at Leeds management team. So we've spoken a lot about water, but water services and water ecosystems in the environment. So I just want to focus us a bit on the sanitation, the right to sanitation. And really, I'm interested in your perspective on how, on applying the human rights-based approach around rights, responsibilities and obligations, particularly in non-networked sanitation. So this is pit latrines, septic tanks, where the majority of the world, particularly the underserved world, this is probably either the service they have or a service that's the most readily available. And the the idea that there's a service provider doesn't always meet that, because it's a household decision often to build a latrine or a septic tank. The government has some authority in the area. There's then a very fragmented system for taking waste away and treating it that involves normally a mix of private, public, informal. So just in my experience, the human rights approach gets very messy for this type of service space. So I'm just interested in your reflection, whether you can cut through it really easy, your razor sharp insight, or whether you also get in a mess. Because reflections on that, please.
This is a big issue. Next year, my last year as rapporteur, it is one of the two topics I will approach. So I have to reflect more in deep way, but so we will collaborate in the near future. But from my experience, it's a huge challenge. Not just because what you are telling. For instance, I was impressed. I came a month ago, my official visits to Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau has no relevant polluting industrial or mining activities, but there is no drinking water because of this question. Because the people has the will, and 10 meters you have the latrine. And so you are polluting your own drinking water everywhere. In the city, you have the capital. There is no drainage. Everyone has put something around their house or their building even. And so all the water, the underground water, they have a good aquifer, or the coastal aquifer that comes from Mauritania until Guinea-Bissau and Guinea. So a huge aquifer, good quality in general, not everywhere, but in most areas, the aquifer is in good state, but it's polluted by the own people that are living on the aquifer. So it's terrible, and there is no, they are not aware about this. And there is a lack of conscience, a lot of, in the government, of course, also, but the people also. And there is another question. When you have a sewage system, it's very rare to have at the end of the sewage system to have a good sanitation plant that works in a good way. No, so it's another question that the people don't like to talk about. This it's positive to talk about drinking water. Is politically very interesting, but to think about these kind of things. That don't make votes and so on, no? And if you go to the most surface level, the first issue, the toilet, is incredible. When I was in Senegal, the communities in the Sahel, the men don't want to know about this. They can do everywhere, no problem, no? The women were very interested, no? So it was very interesting how the women that are marginalized, but this topic, health, take care of the family and sanitation is question of women. So the women go together for building toilets in each with a very special way of funding by themselves. Now it was very interesting. So it's a huge and diverse situation. And finally, another topic that I want to put on the table and to analyze is menstrual hygiene. Is 50% of the population, and the United Nations, every time we talk about this, there is 20, 30 countries that go up and go down, go outside, because immoral, that is a moral issue, and they want even to hear about this. And we are on that topic, in that point, no? So a huge challenge. Not so visible that the water, drinking water and so on. So next year I have to work on this issue.
We'll help you with that. Klaus?
Thank you very much. Klaus Klenk, SAEC in Edinburgh. Thank you very much, Pedro. I'm kind of looking for a clarification question around the idea of the block tariffs, and the question relates to this the principle of full cost recovery, which is, I think, at the center of this to work, because you need to know where that level is to understand who's exempt and what the luxury and other users would have to pay. So in my understanding, to achieve full cost recovery, you need to consider the environmental cost of water use. And in order for that to work, you need to then have an idea about the monetary value that this has, the equivalent of the environmental cost, which requires you to place a value on the services of ecosystem services provided by water ecosystems. But earlier you advocated for not putting a value or price, monetary value on water and I suppose perhaps water ecosystems. So I wonder, in the interest of achieving full cost recovery and identifying where that level of full cost recovery lies, would you be for monetary valuation of water ecosystem services, or do you still think there's kind of fundamental principle reasons for not doing so?
Yes, this is very important. From my point of view, I talked about before on pharmaceutical contamination, new emergence of new contaminants and so on. But I give you another example, more practical, more frequent. In Spain, and I think everywhere. In fact, we give priority to productive uses of water. For instance, in Spain, irrigation. No, is evident. Someone wants to irrigate, and of course, is of general interest. Irrigation. If there are nitrates up, if there are overexploitation of the aquifer up. So what happens? And in reality, is that this. I had an allegation letter to the Spanish government, but with other governments also. What happens when the aquifer that in which rely the people around, as for drinking water, is contaminated by nitrates or by pesticides, or is overexploded? What happens? What happens is the government that can do it say, no problems. I will bring water from 50 kilometers. And when you bring the water, but it's expensive. You have to pump and you have many things. Who pays for this? For this environmental impact? People, the neighbors. Not the ones who have polluted, not the ones who have overexploited the aquifer. So most of the environmental costs of pollution, overexploitation, and so on, they are not the problem of recovering the cost in the tariff, in the rates for neighbors, for the people, for the families. Is the ones who has produced the problem. But the governments don't want to do it because it's not politically profitable. But it's the reality. So now, for instance, in the European Commission, there is a debate. They have, they will give me the data with the pharmaceutical question, because at present, with the new directive, the cost of sanitation for impacts, environmental impacts, is double of the sanitation cost at present. And the Commission has ordered a study and assessment to know what is the cost for the pharmaceutical sector and what is it represent for the cost of the medicaments, the medicines. Is 0.5% of the cost, the real cost. But for municipalities, a disaster. If this has to be covered by the people in the tariff, it's a disaster, it's the revelation. The one will be upset with this. So the response to this is, if we have the principle of not just, in this case, the cost recovery, but who pollutes, recover. And I prefer to say in this way, the one who deteriorates, recover. the state is the polluted payers, of course, if you want. But they prefer in the other way, because how much pay the one who has polluted? Well, the cost of resolving the problem you have produced. So for me, this is the real way to assume the environmental cost developed by the action of the human being generally in productive activities.
So maybe in those cases, yes, some monetization goes on. The lady in pink here.
Thank you. I'm Lata Narayanswamy. I'm also based in politics here in Leeds. Thank you for your talk. So there's lots to think about. I suppose my question builds sort of on these questions around notions of commons and rights and costs. And I suppose I wonder whether you have a thought, because from what you're describing, it feels like there's a fundamental contradiction between the right to water and the market logics that drive the scarcity in the first place. That seems to me at the heart of the problem here, which is we can't have anything called a cost recovery system, because then I've got to work out what the costs are. And depending on who you talk to, those costs are going to be quite variable. Or if I say I've got a global commons, because I appreciate what you're saying about sort of participatory democracy, say at the local level around, say indigenous people who have an intrinsic relationship to water. But in a way, that supposes that they sit in isolation from the global commons that's also extracting in ways that they don't have control over. So then we end up in a situation where we just end up having market logics that we're constantly mitigating for with ever increasing regulation. And then you get, and ultimately what we end up with is we can't allocate resource outside of profit motives. So I would prefer that the polluter didn't pollute in the first place, would seem to me the response, rather than the polluter pays. But surely we're going to get to a point where the pollution is not recoverable anymore. So I just don't know whether, so I'm wondering whether you have a thought about whether the problem here is actually we can't afford to have a market logic around water, because then it's always going to be driven by profit that we're always having to mitigate. And that is going to have, with finite resource, that is not a problem ultimately that we can solve. And then we can't have participation in democracy, because the driving incentive is always profit. And here I'm also thinking about, you can kind of buy things. So then suddenly we've got these very, very water intensive, like AI generating nonsense, which we don't have no democratic control. I'm not an indigenous person, but I still don't want lots of water spent on water for AI generators that get really hot. And we're not even having a debate about that. So I just feel like there is something at the heart of that contradiction between rights and market logics that feels irreconcilable to me. And then I don't know what an institution like the UN, or indeed somebody like yourself, whether there's any possibility to reconcile those things. So that's where they put you, right? Because you can't really, the UN has to be politically neutral, or it's difficult to try to reconcile those logics. I don't know if you have, I don't know if this is just...
We got it. It's very interesting.
The UN has no possibility, because we didn't give to the UN from the governments the capacity even to deal with the obligations that have been accorded at the international level, no? So no way for this question. You have raised different big issues. In my next report, this year, one of them is the governance from a democratic approach. And the other one is the nexus, water and energy, from a human rights-based approach. So one of the main issues I analyze is the artificial intelligence with respect to the huge data centers. The problem is not so much the water they need for cooling. This is important, and for me is concerning in some spaces, scarce in water. And because in the case of water, the main issue is energy. But with respect to water, there is one question, that is, there is obscure, is absolutely opaque imposition. In fact, the big companies, the tech big companies are obliging, and the governments are accepting to collapse information. I have, for instance, in Ireland, it's close to here. Ireland is one of the most developed countries in data centers. And there was, I recover, a question to the parliament, to the government. What about the data on how much water, how much energy? Response of the government. We have no data. And they respect, how do you have no data? You don't want to give the data. But of course you have the data. And this is everywhere. Terrible. So what about they are signing in cases of drought? What will be the priority? They will cut water for the centers, or they cut water for irrigation, or they cut water for the people. It is unknown. But the problem is not so much around water, that is a quantity that normally the people without knowledge perhaps enough, they put liters, no? I don't know, 1 billion of liters, but in fact, would you compare with irrigation in a country such as Spain, well, is an important consumption, no consumption use, but not the most one. But energy in Ireland is more the energy at present consumed by these centers than the whole population, domestic use. It is going for the next, in 2 years, it will need 30% of the electrical needs. All the investment, public investment in many cases from Europe, devoted to alternative energies are consumed not by the energy transition, not at all. It's all consumed by the data centers. And the calculations, the assessment of the main companies, Google and all the 5-7 big companies, they know though, and they say, what we are in the agenda, we have in the agenda for developing the alternative clean energy, renewable, is not enough. So we are doing contracts with nuclear energy plants and with hydrocarbons. The drill from Mr. Trump is not just he's crazy, no? They have this kind of contracts for rebuilding this kind and big dams for hydroelectric power. The dams that were on the, take care with this once again. So the impacts on water will come not so much from a direct way, but from an indirect way through the energy requirements. So this is one thing. The other question, just a reference. I understand the reasons for financializing nature. I understand, and I think there is good intention, but for me it's very dangerous. Look. When you have, for instance, a pollution, and you say, well, let us measure how much costs the pollution, and we put this in the market, and so is the market, who will precise the level of contamination is right, is okay? It's the market who says someone is able to afford to pay for this level of contamination, it's okay. So it's not nature who put the limits of sustainability. It's market who make what is profitable for the market. But I don't want to have profitability for the market. I want to have sustainability. So it's another approach. So when we go in this way, I think it's very dangerous. It's good intentions, but very dangerous. And when we talk about the other big issue, that is, well, but it is very expensive and we have no public funds for this, this is not true. What is the priority in public budgets? We have problems of public funding for the new crazy arms race. No problem. We have plenty of money for this. No problem. And what about human rights? Oh, we have no money. That doesn't make sense. And another question. This question must, in many cases, are related with local financial means because human right to water and sanitation on the services are at local level. And municipalities have no other means. So. But they say, well, okay, we can review what is the priority and what is the capacity we have from the public funds. Perhaps it's not enough. But of course, we have financial markets. I am not against this. But it's different if the negotiation with the big banks, with the big managers of the financial markets is a municipality of Leeds, that it is the British government. Completely different. They can make agreements much more interesting because they are stronger. And to build platforms, financial platforms for basic references, basic issues that we need, such as water and sanitation for municipalities, from public platform that include financial public means, but private means, but under a financial negotiation from the states or from the banks, international, in this sense, for the countries that are more weak governments. So we have the World Bank, we have the American, the Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. This is the function. They can give a good financial means, long-term rates, reasonable, or even subsidies for the question that are not affordable by the basic tariffs and so on. No? But, well.
I mean, the challenges are huge. I'm going to draw it for a close now because we also have now time for having I think it's some coffee and tea and maybe some sweet who's going to regenerate our energy, but also to have the opportunity, you can keep this one-to-one conversation with Pedro here. But I think I want to finish. Thank you, Lata, for leading us. These are huge issues, right? And it can honestly seem very daunting. It's like, oh my God, we have to fight AI, we have to fight this, and there's the risk of the commodification. But guys, if we don't take the space, if we don't use the space, somebody's gonna use it for us, right? And Pedro was making this, for all its fault, for all its weaknesses, for all its deficits, institutions like the United Nations, which have so many problems, right? But the fact that they're the platform that humans we have created for having these global conversations that are hugely important. So I say let's raise to the challenge and to the responsibility that we have as knowledge producers and knowledge transmitters to make sure that we provide these people who really clearly have the willingness and the intention to raise this very complicated stuff to the global arena so they are confident. Now, we know the forces are very big and very powerful, but what's the alternative? That we don't do anything? So let's do it, and let's support Pedro with our research in the next report, in the fight for having make the water conference meaningful, so we can have a proper platform, a proper mechanism to make sure that water gets the space in the stage that the responsibility requires. So thank you very much all for being here. Thank you so much, Pedro, for sharing your wisdom with us.